The people of the Kalahari are among the poorest on the planet. But when it comes to genetic diversity, they're the wealthiest in the world. The variety in their DNA gives them almost superhuman abilities to adapt and survive.
They're actually able to survive up to 7 days without taking any water in.
It tastes like some kind of superfood.
Join me on a road trip through Namibia as I travel with a geneticist tracing the roots of humanity's family tree. The mission of our mobile DNA lab is to collect blood samples from 3 tribal groups with completely different lifestyles. We want to tell the genetic story of how hunter-gatherers became farmers. Basically, the story of us. And what that means for modern medicine. The quest to find the oldest and most diverse human DNA could unlock a new medical future for all of us. Deep in the Kalahari Desert, this healing dance may go all night. The old shaman enters a trance-like state. He shakes with spiritual energy as if it's boiling up inside him. Tonight, his special powers will help cure sickness in the village. But in the future, could his genetic heritage help heal the Western world?
What people don't realise is the amount of genetic diversity between 2 Sutwasi or 2 people that are San is much greater than any other population group. So for example, you may as well call me a Han Chinese. There's more similarity between myself and a Han Chinese than between 2 San people.
The longer a population is around, the more time it has to build up genetic variations. San people carry some of the oldest known human lineages, stretching back more than 170,000 years. The San artists that patiently carved out these images, maybe around 5,000 years ago, had a genetic toolkit that equipped them perfectly to cope with whatever this environment could throw at them. But the amazing thing is this: those genes haven't disappeared. They remain with us today. And if we all share this hunter-gatherer heritage, what does this mean for modern medicine? A world away in Australia, that's a question Professor Vanessa Hayes wants to answer. She runs a genomics lab at the Garvan Institute of Medical Research in Sydney.
If we really want to understand the extent of human diversity and how that diversity impacts the human genome, we really have to go to Africa.
Originally from South Africa, Vanessa searches for the genetic causes of disease like prostate cancer. But she thinks we may be looking for answers in the wrong genomes.
We study disease at the genetic level. We're always mapping DNA, especially since the new technology wave. We are sequencing sick people over and over and over. The problem is, what defines sick if we don't know what is healthy?
Since 2008, Vanessa's studied the DNA in blood samples from hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari Desert because she regards their genome as the best example of a super healthy human.
I believe the Sutwasi people are the most representative of our common ancestor.
You're looking for the genetic baseline?
The genetic baseline, correct.
For everyone?
For everyone.
It's been a couple of years since Vanessa last travelled to Namibia. She's returning to collect more blood samples from 3 very different communities. The first place we're heading to is a San village called Noma in the Kalahari Desert at the remote northeast edge of the country.
have a very, very great understanding of bloodlines. They have a very good understanding of how to marry. They don't understand genetics. They just don't know it's called genetics, as we call it.
So in Garvin you're a genomicist, but here you're a tracker of ancestors.
Exactly. It's how you relay that information, and what are we doing with their blood is telling the story of us, the simple story of us, mankind, that they understand.
The San, also known as Bushmen, are among the earliest indigenous inhabitants of southern Africa. With a population of about 1,400, the Zutwantsi are one of the few San tribes that still occupy their traditional lands. Because their ancestry goes way back to the beginning of modern humans, their DNA has had time to accumulate more changes than any other population on the planet. Once, we were all hunter-gatherers. Everyone shares a direct, unbroken line of female DNA that stems from a hypothetical woman known as mitochondrial Eve, who lived around 200,000 years ago in Africa.
We're going on a hunt with people who could be the closest living descendants of the mother of all humanity.
The Zutwantsi don't grow crops or keep livestock. Part of each day is spent gathering food from the bush or hunting for meat. Their small, light bodies are good for stamina when hunting animals in the arid heat. Darts are tipped with lethal poison made from beetle grubs, and once an animal is hit, it's tracked until it dies, sometimes for days. Roughly translated, the name Kalahari derives from a word meaning the great thirst. Water comes from unexpected places. This plant looks small on the surface, but underground has a fat tuber known as a water root.
It's a good weight.
What's even more amazing is how little the locals need to drink. Unlike me, they're genetically equipped to survive up to 7 days without water.
There's actually been an adaptation in their genetic makeup. What we see is genetic changes in their salt channels to allow the retention of water, and we seem to have lost that in more recently diverged populations. We've either lost it or they have retained that ability to do that.
I was thirsty, now I'm not.
Other adaptations to arid conditions include pronounced buttocks to help store water and energy reserves. Unlike other southern African populations, a characteristic fold in their eyelid serves to shade the eyes from solar radiation. Medicines and drugs are collected from the bush, and there's a novel way of recording medical information. These tattoos on the senior man of the village indicate how healthy he's been over his lifetime.
So what he was saying is they cut into the skin and will place a specific plant into the skin for chest pain. And then take coal, crunch it up, and put the coal into the sore, into the scar, and it will seal over and remain as a tattoo. So that essentially is a person's medical record.
And it's about particular plants, so even more than a medical record, it's like a prescription.
Oh yes, absolutely. This is the oldest medical grounds. We were walking on a pharmacy. They have everything. They even have a Viagra.
Where do you put the markings for that?
There's no markings. I haven't asked.
It's a very different medical world that Vanessa brings to the village. She's come here to collect blood because these people have more genetic diversity than any other population she's ever sequenced.
Onthou julle ook hoe ek gesê hoe ek dit doen in die bloed? Hoe julle die spore kyk in die grond. En jy volg die dier, miskien die duike. En jy sien die duik het hierdie kant toe gegaan en dan daardie kant toe gegaan. Dat ons die spore kan lees in die bloed.
The trust that Vanessa's built with the village is evident. In a community that's largely illiterate, she follows strict protocols for gaining informed consent. Everything is explained in Afrikaans and translated into click language. Participation is voluntary, and anyone can change their mind and withdraw at any time.
To know what's inside my body.
Yes, of course.
That's all totally the real life of a human being.
Exactly, that is correct.
Tutwansi carefully control their genetic mix through cultural practices. With only 20 female names and 28 male names, they never marry first or second cousins. There's little intermarriage with other groups. Polygamy is not practiced, as it makes sense for hunter-gatherers not to have too many mouths to feed.
He likes the colour difference between our skins. So is gewoon daar. Oma, Goshegal. Okay, los die face. Hand op. Okay, klein gat.
This young bloke is happy to remind me of my genetic inferiority.
There is another side of the coin, and that is really that although we have lost some of these adaptations that the hunter-gatherers carry, they haven't gained the variation that we have to be resistant to diseases like malaria, to TB. She says she's not scared because she's a woman, she's had 3 children. The people here have not been exposed to agriculture. So many of the diseases that we face as modern society is actually as a result of the advent of agriculture, diseases like smallpox, chickenpox. And for this reason, they haven't had any time to adapt to these modern world diseases.
The next day, as we leave the Kalahari, I'm thinking how European genomes shape up in comparison with the Tutwansi.
They have more variety in their DNA sequence than, say, you and me, who's from European ancestry. Why has this happened? Everybody who has left Africa has gone through a major bottleneck.
Over the last 90,000 years, there were waves of human migration out of Africa, around the Indian Ocean to Australia, across Asia and into southern Europe. But during the last ice age, much of Eurasia was covered by glaciers. Populations crashed and only started recovering from isolated refuges as the ice sheets receded about 20,000 years ago.
As a consequence, all Europeans and Asians that are around today are actually descendants from these few migrants, whereas everybody else left in Africa still maintain that diversity.
Amongst the vibrant diversity that remains in Namibia, Vanessa wants to capture the difference between nomadic hunter-gatherers and settled pastoralists. In their genes should be written the story of the most dramatic change in the last 10,000 years of human history, the birth of agricultural society. That's why we're heading to the home of cattle herders, known as Herero. We've come to the jagged ramparts of the Waterberg Plateau. This is ancestral Herero land. But what are now national parks, game reserves and cattle farms was also once a key stronghold of the German Empire that colonised Namibia.
Just over 100 years ago, this valley was one of many battlefields in the German Herero Wars, which became the first genocide of the 20th century. More than 2/3 of the Herero people were annihilated, in just a few years. While Herero culture survives, for the women, some old German customs live on too.
If you have a look at their attire, it's very Germanic. They're wearing these beautiful petticoated long dresses, just like the Germans used to wear back in the 1900s. The only difference is they will have cattle horns on their heads, which reflects the importance of cattle in the lifestyle of the Herero people.
Their genetic mix is the combination of many populations due to the history of colonisation and the Herero practice of polygamy. This is Akatumba location in Herero land in central Namibia. Vanessa's taken 40 or 50 blood samples from Herero people before, but this is the first time she's been to this particular village.
En je ma Herero. Pa Herero. Pa Duits. Is okay? Good.
Traditionally, the Herero make their living by farming livestock for meat and milk. So does diet and lifestyle change DNA, or is it the other way around?
The most significant signature that we see is the conversion to lactose tolerant. So we were all lactose intolerant when we were hunter-gatherer people. And that's what we still see in the Zutwasi people in Namibia today, is that they are all lactose intolerant. What we see here with the Herero that actually practice agropastoralism, we see lactose tolerance, which has happened all across the world.
Can you sit? Yeah.
With the event of agriculture and the move into different regions, we actually had to become stronger as people. And you will see here with the Herero, very strong people, able to lift heavy weights, able to carry water on their heads. And it's a huge amount. There's no way a hunter-gatherer would be able to do that. So these are real physical adaptations that have been critical for us to survive in our new lifestyle as the agropastoralists.
But could this lifestyle bring with it a greater genetic susceptibility to diseases like prostate cancer?
We don't know that for sure yet. What we do know is that prostate cancer is very significant in Africa. We know that African people present a lot younger, and when they do present with prostate cancer, they present with highly aggressive disease. And it's really, really important that we study this disease within Africa if we want to understand prostate cancer globally.
That's why this work is crucial. If we're going to unravel the genetic risks to health, we have to use the complete range of genes that make us human. The samples from this village today might hold the key to solving medical mysteries in the future.
What are we?
Adding information from Africa to their databases enables Vanessa's team to build more accurate genomes. Back in Sydney, her blood collection is growing.
Just look that way.
Before we went to Namibia, she took my blood as well to compare with the mitochondrial DNA from Africa. And as it says here, you're going to store my DNA indefinitely.
Indefinitely, unless you ask us not to.
But until then, I'm immortal in your database.
Yes, you are.
Genomic work that once took years and millions of dollars can now be done in just days for a few thousand.
We were fortunate to be the first team to sequence a complete human genome here in Australia. That first project cost us $2.2 million just for the reagents to sequence 2 individuals. Now we can sequence with this fantastic technology a complete human genome for $1,500.
So from here, you want to build a nationwide database, perhaps?
Absolutely. That's the future of genomics.
That future is nearing reality because of this new technology. These state-of-the-art machines at Garvin can sequence 80,000 genomes a year. With African DNA as a baseline, Vanessa's team can develop a reference genome that's more truly representative of all people. It's like completing a phone book with real names and numbers,
rather than just blank spaces. Once they run my blood through the process, how does my impoverished European set of genes measure up to those from Namibia?
An average European individual will have 3.2, say, million single nucleotide variants in their genome. We find a Sutwasi person to have 5.2 million DNA variants.
That means my DNA is less genetically fit because I have far less diversity to adapt with. Comparing my mitochondrial genome with people from the Kalahari reveals an average of more than 100 differences.
If we take any two Europeans or European and Asian maternal genome and we compare it against each other, we'll see approximately 20 differences. But what is more significant than that is if we compared two Click-speaking people, so a Sutwasi and a Kun, both hunter-gatherers, both living in the same area, to you and me look exactly alike, they carried on average 80 differences. And that really shows us the internal, within population diversity is so much greater than what we have outside of Africa.
There may well be people walking around in southern Africa today who carry old lineages that we don't yet know exist. One of the earliest branches from our most recent common ancestor, mitochondrial Eve, was the Zitwansi lineage, known as L0. Vanessa's team has dated its divergence as 172,000 years ago. My maternal lineage from Europe is known as K1A. It diverged just 12,000 years ago. And it turns out that my K lineage makes Otzi the Iceman a distant relative of mine. He's the freeze-dried Bronze Age man, made famous when his 5,000-year-old remains emerged from a glacier in the Italian-Austrian Alps.
You share a common ancestor with Otzi, but since your lineage came about, you actually had time to diverge. So probably another migration within Europe.
But the further back in genetic time you go, all roads lead to Africa. This is the Namib Desert. In the most arid parts, the annual rainfall is no more than a couple of millimetres. This vast desert is largely uninhabited, except for small communities of the Topana Nama people who herd livestock and live off the land. The Nama are the third community we've come to meet because their lifestyle lies between the hunter-gatherers and the agro-pastoralists.
What I'm really hoping this research will find out is that link between the hunter-gatherers and the agro-pastoralists that we've worked with, because the Nama people represent the herder-gatherer people.
Several hundred people live around here, and this is the first time that Vanessa's been able to include Nama in her research.
I actually expect there to be quite different adaptations than, for example, the San people. As you can see, this desert is a lot harsher, actually, than the Kalahari desert. The Nama people, and especially the people that live here, known as the Topana people, have adapted very well to this environment. There is a natural fruit that grows in the area called the Nara Fruit, and this is really their staple diet.
As click speakers, the Nama appear to share a deep ancestral link with the San of the Kalahari.
What genetics is able to do is actually give us a definitive answer about the relationship between the different click-speaking groups. Because, as we say, someone can learn a language, but DNA doesn't lie.
In their DNA, Vanessa also expects to find evidence of the transition to lactose tolerance.
We will assume that in the Nama people, we would see either the same adaptation or a similar adaptation, giving them the ability to drink milk, because they do have goats and they have had livestock for as long as we know that they've been in this region.
Is dit goed? Moet onthou om te asem.
These samples will start to reveal the role of a herder-gatherer way of life in the story of how agricultural society evolved. Wherever we visited in Namibia, the desert-dwelling Nama, the cattle-herding Herero, or the hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari, people were pleased that finally science seemed to be taking notice of them.
What we're doing here is going to certainly be of relevance to modern society, but in this particular society who still practice traditional medicine, it's unlikely going to benefit them. But it will in the future benefit their grandchildren as the younger generation are now moving more into the cities. This will help include them as well and all indigenous people into modern medicine.
But most of the global research effort continues to be on the least genetic diversity, outside of Africa.
This is a bias that needs to be overcome. The HG19 human reference genome used by the pharmaceutical industry to design and test drugs was based on 20 people who are all European or Asian, with the exception of just one African American. Basing medical research on this Eurocentric genome led to treatments that simply didn't work in Africa. Drugs designed to treat HIV infections, for example, targeted a specific gene variant that's in the reference genome but completely absent in southern Africa.
The way it's always gone is drugs are developed internationally, they're then sent to Africa and they try and see if it works. That's it in a nutshell. Doesn't matter what the disease is. That's how it's always gone. Our argument is, can we please just do science also the other way around? Let's do some research on the ground in Africa and translate it to the rest of the world.
Even if you've never been to Africa, on a genetic level, you never really left. When it comes to the origins of humanity, this is where we all come from. And when we ask, what does African DNA mean for our future medicine? The answer really lies in what we lose by not including the oldest and most diverse human genomes.
Gewoonlik is dit net van witmense bloed wat die medisyne gemaak word, soos ek verstaan het. Nou is dit ook ons bloed wat gevat word en ons bloed wat gaan getoets word in die medisyne gemaak word. Nou sal ons ook nou bietjie. Daarom is ek bietjie bly en trots op haar.